right, thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Town Council and School Committee joint work session. It is Tuesday, January 7th, 2020. The time is 6:30. We'll get started with the pledge to the flag. Please rise and join us. Thank you, everyone. And tonight we're going to have a discussion regarding the capital improvement program for our first agenda item. We'll hand it over to the town manager and the school superintendent to discuss the school's.
That's great, thank you. So Linda and Zach and Marianne and I met this morning, and we drew straws. Linda's going to start us off, and then I'll jump in after that and provide sort of an overview. I'm trying to... So we've got an interesting meeting here tonight in some ways because what drives the capital improvement program for the next 6 years is the school project, the school's facilities project. It's the largest project in the capital improvement program. School's capital budget for next year is really very, very conservative. It's a very small capital budget next year. It's $318, is it? $327,000. It's a very small capital budget next year. There's not a lot to shave on the capital budget side for the schools at all. In fact, there's nothing to shave from the capital budget side for the schools next year. Our budget, capital budget for next year is really just well, it's actually a slight reduction as well when you take the tax assessor's project for revaluation out of it. The actual infrastructure improvements are a reduction in the town budget for a capital budget next year as well. So the real gist of this capital improvement plan is the 6-year debt-funded program. We have a $6.5 million recommendation for infrastructure improvements on the municipal side, which we will discuss tomorrow night. And then we've got an $85 million project for school facilities improvement, which is the subject of discussion tonight. We do not have final cost estimates on the project, and the project's still in flux. This is a very big project for the town of South Kingstown, trying to get this right and trying to make sure that we define the project in a way that is going to meet the needs of the students and at the same time meet the needs of the community has been a daunting task. But I think we're getting closer. We've got RGB and cost estimators at this point looking at the possibility of moving into Curtis Corner, building an addition onto that, and using that as the high school. That project, again, the cost estimators are working on right now. I'm going to let Linda describe that. I'm going to let Linda go through the CIP as it is for the schools, and then I'll come back, and what I'd like to do is provide a fairly extensive overview of how the conversation can be fruitful tonight and as we go forward over the next several months. This is a big project. It poses some significant challenges for the community. I think that at the end of the day, the project as it's been conceived is doable, but it isn't going to be easy to do. It is going to carry with it some burdens, so I'd like to talk about how we can discuss those, how we can frame those, how we can make sure that we understand those as a community so that we get to a successful project without tearing each other apart, because I do think that this project has the potential to create a great deal of conflict. So I want to make sure that we're bounding that conflict here tonight. Linda?
So thank you for having us here tonight. Tonight our goal is really the capital improvement program, and I'm going to ask Marianne to share the bulk of this with you, but I just first want to kind of frame out the next little bit of our presentation, or the bulk of our presentation. And I want to say that we understand the serious responsibility we have with what we're talking about tonight, because we are talking about the future here. While we, of course, we take every financial decision we make very seriously, we are talking about a long-term future as we talk, as Rob shared with you. This is a commitment and a responsibility, and we need to be very thoughtful as we work through it. We tonight are going to share a presentation that's grounded in where we started in August. So we have had this plan presented and adopted by our school committee at our September 10th school committee meeting. So that's where, and if you remember, at that point, we were still in the stage 2. We have a strong building committee that's helping to step us through the decisions we're making around our CIP. And then parallel with that, the planning for next school year and the pay-as-you-go part of the CIP. So tonight we'll bring that to you with some minor updates because, of course, conversation has changed around location of the high school. Big picture, we were always talking about some improvements to our elementary schools. We were talking about an addition onto Broad Rock. That would allow us to put our 5th grade at the elementary schools. It would then allow us to have 6, 7, 8 at Broad Rock. And then we were, when I came on board, talking about Columbia Street as the site for our high school. On October 28th, I asked the school committee to reconsider Curtis Corner, not as a new site, not as a knockdown build from scratch, but as a renovation with an addition. And so that's where we are tonight, is examining the feasibility. And so of that piece of the high school. So there are, while we know at the end of the day, though, we are talking about an overall project that would have to support. We're not talking about anything beyond the numbers that are presented here tonight. So we'll step through the kind of foundation, and for those that aren't familiar, we'll share the definition of the capital planning from the state perspective. Then we'll step into where we are today, and then the near future, what we see for the timeline and the dates, because we thought those questions and conversation is important for the general public to be aware of, as it's right around the corner. So if I can, I'm gonna ask Mary Ann to step us through the same presentation or a very similar presentation to what we had shared with our school committee in September.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you. This presentation, it seems like just 2 days ago we were sitting here a year ago going through the capital budget, and now we're here again. So it's similar to what we've seen in previous years. There's been a number of updates, and especially as it relates to timeline and some of the meetings and things that we've had over the past year. So capital budget is a major non-recurrent tangible fixed asset with a useful life of 5 years and a value to exceed $10,000. The 2 areas that this particular plan is going to focus on is a 6-year capital plan and what we call the 1-year pay-as-you-go plan. The 1-year pay-as-you-go plan is in the school district's general operating budget. According to RIDE, the Rhode Island Department of Education, a capital improvement plan is a long-range plan, typically 5 to 6 years, which identifies capital needs in the district and provides for funding schedule, timeline, and implementation. The capital plan also provides for a systematic evaluation of all projects at one time so that the district can anticipate future needs. The capital improvement plan should not include routine maintenance of expenses, but should include required upgrades of facilities, including but not limited to roof repairs, heating and ventilation system repairs, or window doors replacement. The school housing aid definition means funds appropriated by the General Assembly in support of completion of school construction projects to guarantee adequate school housing for all public school children in the state and to prevent the cost of school housing from interfering with the effective operation of the schools. This is also defined in Rhode Island General Laws 16735 through 16747. RIDE annually awards school housing aids within the amounts and at such time as authorized on these general laws. State funding awards shall award after projects are completed. If project is substantially complete, then they will award the funds. Our current reimbursement right now is at a minimum of 35%. We will receive 35% based on Rhode Island general laws for all housing aid that have been, where the projects have been approved by RIDE and the appropriate documentation has been submitted for substantially completed. To provide a little historical perspective, Article 9 in 2019 adopted fiscal budget for the state included a $250,000 bond issue for school constructions. The bond issue was approved by the voters in November 2018 with the 17% voting in favor of the bond issues. Funds are available for the district's necessity of construction application, which, although this says September 2020, I thought I changed this. No, that's correct. We will be submitting in September 2020. Yeah. We did change it. We've been advised by RIDE that the district is eligible for funds up to 50% of the cost of the projects. This is based on a recent conversation we had with Rhode Island Department of Education. The reason why it's an increase of 35% is this slide shows the different areas that RIDE is reimbursing us for. We also provided a link to that. Some of the areas that they're looking to reimburse is health and safety, replacement, newer and fewer, education enhancement, decreased overcrowding, and increased utilizations. As we go through the process of the application process, through the different stages, once we get to stage 3 and finally stage 4, when we're submitting our application, we'll work very closely with the folks at RIDE to ensure that we maximize and get the most credits possible for reimbursement.
So just to clarify on this, so we, as Mary Ann said, we know we qualify for the 35%. We also, this is a handout that Christine Lopes-Metcalf from the Department of Education came to my office and gave to us, and we went over, and then we also did a conference call with her. So the health and safety, we also receive an additional 5%. The educational enhancements, we would qualify for an additional 5%, and then the newer and fewer, we would also qualify for that 5% as well. So that's the 35 plus the 15.
Under Rhode Island general laws, districts are eligible to receive state aid on capital projects based on the necessity of school construction process. The necessity of school construction process is a multi-stage application process that requires the local education authority to conduct thorough facilities assessments towards the creation of an efficient and prudent master plan. Once reviewed, vetted, and prioritized by the school building authority, the SBA advisory board would recommend projects for the approval by the Council of Elementary and Secondary Education. Approved projects are eligible for state aid or SBS capital funding progress payment. Stage 1 and 2 are the major application process for all school districts. And that's what we're currently involved with. The stage 1 has been completed, we're in stage 2. Stage 1 requires the districts to submit a letter of intent, as well as a commitment to follow the school construction regulation and all applicable statutes and regulations. During stage 1, LEAs conduct a facility condition assessment, prepare demographic projections, and provide educational programs for each school facility. Through the careful study of these factors, LEAs attain a comprehensive understanding of the district-wide capacity, enrollment trends, and the alignment of existing facilities to the educational program being offered by each school. I'm waiting for my page turner. Stage 2 identifies the solution. LEAs work with an architectural and engineering team to propose solution to the identified issues. This process requires the development of schematic design documentations that can be used to provide dependable cost estimate. These scopes descriptions and the accompanying costs are the basis for establishing a budget and project descriptions that are forwarded to the School Business Advisory Board and the Council on Elementary Secondary Education. The bulk of the process of this application process is stage 2, and at times, as we've seen here, it is a multi-month, multi-year process and task. Stage 3 is the design phase. That's when we have finally received approval from RIDE to move forward, where we do go through the design and get ready for the bid process. Design, as we go through the design process, there are numerous meetings we have with the Rhode Island Department of Education as we vet through the plans and also the bid documents. Once that has been done, RIDE gives us the authority to go out to bid. Stage 3 is then completed. Stage 4 is at the end of the project. When a project is substantially completed, we're in stage 4, and that's when we request the funding from RIDE. The last stage is asset protection. In recent years, we've all heard that RIDE has passed the maintenance of effort, or it was General Assembly passed the maintenance of effort, to continue to protect and continue providing the necessary maintenance and care of the assets once we have completed the stage 4 process. Keep in mind, any necessity of construction application that has been approved is a 5-year document. It's only good for 5 years. After that 5 years, you need to resubmit another document. We are in the second of a 5-year process. We just completed major construction projects with the first 5 years. A project beyond this fiscal year are based on an ongoing assessment of all district facilities and stage 2 application currently in process. In order to receive housing aid for these recommended projects, the district is required to submit and receive approval for its necessity of construction application. To provide a little bit of historical perspective of where we've been and where we are now, in January 2017, during the fiscal 2018 to 2024 capital improvement budget discussion, it was determined that with the continued declining in enrollment, the district should seek proposal from a professional educational and facility planning firm to provide a comprehensive long-term 20-year education facility plan. On April 4, 2014, after public interviews of 3 proposals, the school committee awarded the contract to RGB Architects. RGB commenced work in May of 2017 and submitted their final report in January 2018. At that point, we proceeded with working on the Stage 2 application, which was submitted to RIDE in February 2019. In March 2019, RIDE informed the district that we would be required to resubmit our Stage 2 application in September 2019. In April 2019, RIDE approved a number of security projects included in the February 2019 stage application. And I'm pleased to let you folks know this evening that those security projects, with the exception of the Peacedale parking lot, are substantially completed. We started them in late August, beginning September, and they were all substantially completed by December 31st. If you've had the opportunity to visit any of the schools, you'll see that there's a new vestibule that folks walk into, and it has substantially increased the security of the building. So we're really pleased to report that those projects have been completed. In July 2019, the Building Committee recommended to the school committee that the target date for resubmittal of Stage 2 application be moved from September 2019 to February 2020. In November 2019, the school committee approved a feasibility study on the expansion of the Curtis Corner Middle School site, for which substantially moved the target date for the resubmittal of the Stage 2 application from February 2020 to September 2020. Now we'll go through the actual numbers, and just as I've said in previous presentations, this document and this capital plan is a living document. As we go through our application process and final our application process, especially with the items that are part of the 6-year capital plan, This plan will be subject to change and updated, especially once we get approval from RIDE and as we go through the application process, because we still need to go up to RIDE and present them with the draft application as they guide us through it. Hazard School, at this point, we are scheduled not to have any capital projects in the upcoming years. That goes, the same holds true for the administration building. The high school, we're looking to do about $50 million worth of capital improvement projects. The timetable associated with this, based on our latest application process that we think we'll be okay with, is we see this being an 18 to 24-month process, 2021 to 22, $25 million, and another $25 million in 22, 23. As I said, these numbers may change based on what the plan does and as we begin the construction process, which means we may spend more money in the previous year or we may pay a little less than the following year.
Just for the council's awareness and for the committee's awareness and for the public's awareness, the CIP as developed on the municipal side includes $65 million for the high school. It's not a $50 million. This was the number that the school committee had approved, the $50 million in August. Information that's flowed into the school building committee since then has put that price tag up to $65 million, largely cost escalation because of time that's transpired. So the budget that you've got actually has a $65 million placeholder, not a $50 million placeholder.
So with that information, what we'll do is we'll take this capital plan back to the school committee and look for them to approve it based on the updated information that we have. Curtis Corner Middle School, as a middle school, will not receive any construction. Broad Rock Middle School in 22-23, we're looking to do a $15 million project. We think at this point we'll be able to get that done in 1 year because the bulk of the project is additions to the building in the back, and we think we can get those additions done while school is in session. In the past 2 years, the district completed 2 different projects, obviously the security project and a $1.4 million HVAC project at Matunic School, and both projects took place while school was in session, and we were very successful with that. So I'm encouraged to say that I think we'll be able to do the Broad Rock School while school is in session. The elementary schools, we have not defined
Ask a clarifying question real quickly. Abel? Is that okay? Hold on 1 second. Sorry, Marianne. So you had mentioned that it went from $50 million to $65 million because of the delay of, I would say, like less than a year probably. Do you think that those numbers are going to continue to climb like that every year? Should we be predicting that in our cost?
RGB has advised the school building committee that we should expect 6% escalation for every year that construction does not begin. That's their number. We should be expecting the cost of the overall project to increase by 6% for every year we haven't broken ground.
And what is 6% of 50?
Well, that's not actually the entire cost. It was largely due to cost escalation, but it's cost escalation on the whole project and modifications of the high school component of that project. So it wasn't, obviously, 6% of 50 is not 15. It's less than that.
So the elementary schools, we don't have it extrapolated or detailed out as to how much we'll be spending at each school at this point. Once we finalize the Stage 2 application, we'll be able to do that. However, we're looking at $15 million for the elementary schools. So that's on the combined slide of elementary. And finally, district paving project. The building committee has been discussing these projects for a while, and it was decided that Wakefield School, they recommend to the school committee that be more of a paving, relining the parking lot. Peasdale will be a major reconstruction of that parking lot, and I'm happy to report RIDE officially approved our emergency application on December 16th, so that project is slated to get done And DEM's also, we got the DEM approval also. That project is slated to begin towards the end of June and get done during the summer months. So we're really happy to report that that application has been approved, and we expect probably to be on them out to bid with that, if not next week, early the following week. So finally, the totals for us, and these numbers, I guess, will change a little bit based on my conversation with what.
So actually, there's a bit of a discrepancy as well between the CIP here and the CIP as presented in the municipal budget. The total project for the schools at this point is $85 million, not an 80.5. So again, these numbers are very fluid. We are waiting on cost estimates. The idea has been to make sure that we were moving the project forward, and since August, the numbers have been changing, and the number that was submitted to us and the number that we've taken as the base is $85 million. There may, in fact, be some difference in the way the allocation is even within the schools. But again, the total project cost that we've built a CIP around is $85 million, and the where it goes, which school is getting which treatment, is still the subject of discussion before the school building committee, with the architects, and with the cost estimators at this point. These are fluid numbers.
And we should have some estimates back tomorrow.
The month.
Yeah, or middle of the month, sorry.
Can I? So,
I wouldn't make that big a deal about the fact that there is a discrepancy, but it should be noted. These numbers
The other big one that I thought was a little different, when the elementary schools, was it 15 million in here?
Correct.
I thought they were slated to get $750 per school.
That was the educational piece of it.
Okay.
The 15 million also takes into account a lot of the mechanical HVAC and things like that. The 750.
So the things that were already planned but not part of the facilities upgrade, meaning these would have been planned anyway at some point.
Correct. It was more infrastructure related as opposed to education piece of it.
So it's deferred maintenance that we're now attending to, basically.
Oh, microphone.
65 million,
30. So that would be 90.
right, that would take us to 90, right, million, right?
I'm taking that.
The math doesn't work,
Yeah,
is what I'm saying.
Well, we don't have the 65. We're
Right.
using 65.
Okay, all right.
We have the 50, 15, and 15, which adds up to the 80.
Gotcha.
So it appears, based on the capital improvement plan that the town manager has recommended, we will now update these numbers so that they do agree with you. We need to bring it back to the school committee for their approval. And that's happened in other years where the town manager's number, based on the recommendation of the town manager, the numbers have slightly changed, and that's what we've done.
And in reality, well, usually the CIP, once it's sort of presented, is kind of locked in. This year, we will have better numbers from a cost estimator on the 18th, is it? We're looking?
16th.
The 16th of January. So we're going to have to adjust this. We're going to have to tweak the numbers based on actual projections from
It's on the thing. It's in there.
the architect and the cost estimators. These numbers are placeholders, and they have shifted.
And I think from the school building perspective, our concern is that the numbers are going to be potentially higher than what we're projecting. So, right. A few more days.
Actually, it's the 14th, superintendent's.
We have a slide on that, too. So the next is the pay-as-you-go. These are the items that are currently in our operating budget. Technical communication programs, $25,000. That is replacing of some of the Cisco phones. We've been in this for some time, and I'm happy to report that in another couple of years we would have finally gotten this all caught up. Then we have computer equity replacement of $50,000. These are the computers we're replacing throughout the district. The one-to-one computer programming, it's $175,000. What we do is we, from provided one-to-one for the freshman class coming in, and also the the sixth graders. They also use a one-to-one. They do not take them home. They keep them with them. Network hardware, a lot of behind the scenes is $75,000. Vehicle replacement of $55,000. We have deferred vehicle replacement a couple of years now in a row with the school, and unfortunately, we're to the point now that we're down a truck, and that is not helping us as we get into the snow plowing season. So we will be looking next year to buy a truck. This amount is slightly higher than what you've seen in other years. It's a little bigger truck so that we can put a sander on the back of it, on the top of it, or on the, I guess on top if you want to call it. And what we'll be using that is to sand a lot of the sidewalks leading to the schools. We're fortunate here to have the relationship that we have with the town, that the town folks sand our parking lots for us because we don't have the vehicles or the manpower to be able to sand that. So we're fortunate enough that the town does help us in that area. And the last thing is a custodian. It's a Tomcat carbon floor machine. I would call it like a Bursa, you know, when you scrub the floors with it. The difference with this particular piece of equipment is it doesn't use any chemicals. It doesn't use any water, which is really interesting. So you put on, and it just cleans up, takes up all the old wax and lays down a new finish. Based on the purchase of this of $11,000, we think the return on this investment will be about 2 years, as relates to the fact we no longer have to buy the chemicals, we no longer need to use the water, and also it cleans much faster than the current machines, so we have some savings, or we'll see some potential savings in manpower as we go through our summer cleaning. Also, it's much safer. We've seen some scary slip and falls on a newly waxed floor, where we will no longer have that. So this is the pay-as-you-go capital.
Marianne, I just have one question.
Sure.
Does the one-to-one program belong in there? One-to-one technology program, does that belong in there? Is it
Yes.
longer than a 5-year life? Or is it longer than a 5-year use?
Yeah, those one-to-one, what we do is we give them to freshmen and we give them to sixth graders. And the freshmen, when they get seniors, we take those laptops and repurpose them down to the elementary schools.
Okay, thank you.
And now a timetable of the capital plan. Our capital plan was due to the town manager on August 16th. On September 10th, the capital plan was presented to the school committee, and they did approve it. Town manager's capital plan was submitted to the town council on December 19th. And also on December 19th, the district received approval from RIDE for the Peacedale parking lot. And here we are, January 2020, with a public hearing on the capital budget. Some interesting meetings, important meetings that will be taking place during this month. We thought it was a good idea to put this out there since a lot of folks have asked about this. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., we'll be here with the building committee. On January 14th at 6 o'clock at the high school, the school committee is having a work session with the presentation of Curtis Corner High School feasibility study. Following that meeting will be the regular school committee business meeting. And then on January 22nd, 2020 at 6:30, the school building committee will meet at Curtis Corner. That meeting will include a tour of Curtis Corner and public comment. And that pretty much wraps up the presentation.
Are there any questions?
Marianne, I just have a clarifying question, and I thought we were holding our questions till the end, so I'm going back to close to the beginning of your presentation, where on the slide where you talked about school housing and school housing aid. So you said, and the slide says that the funding is awarded after the projects are substantially complete.
That's correct.
That's the current situation. It was my understanding from the trainings and work sessions that I went to about the bond issue that passed in November of 2018 at the state level, that means of repaying from the state was going to change.
I have not heard anything to that as of yet. Have you? No, I have heard nothing about that.
All right, I will look up
Yeah,
my notes.
Yeah.
I will look up my notes and
Yeah,
handouts
it'll be
and
interesting
get them
because-
to you because that was one of the things that they said they would no longer expect the LEAs to complete the project, then get refunded. There would be like certain checkpoints that when this was done, then a certain percentage of the money could get paid by the state, towards our 50% reimbursement rate.
I have not seen anything like that, and I have not seen anything to that effect on the RIDE website.
So maybe, and
Yeah, I can
this
follow
was-
up on that. That's a good question, but
this
I
was-
have not heard that yet.
This was RIASC meetings, and I lost count of how many of them I attended, but prior to the passing of the bond in 2018. So maybe that, maybe when the bond passed, that kind of went away. Do you know what I'm saying? Maybe that was the idea, the plan, and maybe that didn't. But I'll look back and see through my notes in my spare time.
Okay, great, thanks.
How much of the $80 or $85 million do we anticipate will be financed through the issuance of bonds? And what length of maturity will those bonds have?
No.
The bonds will be $85 million. It'll be $6 million as pay-as-you-go up front, so it'll be financing $78 million, and we're estimating at a 4% interest rate, but the way the market is today, it could be lower. But by the time we do the issuance, and that could change, so we're using a conservative estimate of 4.
How about the maturity life on the bonds?
They will be 20 years.
20 years? I believe the useful life of these buildings after the construction will be longer than that. Do we have any interest in extending the life to lower the debt service costs?
We can, but then we pay more interest over the time. So, but that's stuff we can talk about with our fiscal advisor, and as we get close to the actual bond issuance and get out there. But that's something that can be discussed. There's different scenarios we can do. We can do level debt. There's a lot of scenarios we can run to, but we first have to figure out how much what the project's going to be, and then we can go from there.
Thank you.
But I will note, 30 years is not off the table. As we get into some of the numbers later on tonight, we're going to see why.
And so has there been any discussion of when and if we sell one of the buildings using the money from that to offset the bond at all? Because at this point, we're sort of, when we talk about the budget, we talk about the interest on the bond, paying some of the interest up front, and that being kind of considered part of the school budget. So it seems like it would make sense, right, if you sell a school to put it towards the other buildings?
So redevelopment of schools and municipal buildings generally is tough. It's not an easy thing to do. Federal, state, local buildings are all sort of built for purpose, and they're not easily repurposed. Depending on the character of the building, depending on the location of the building, depending on the land, you might get a developer to come in and knock down a cinder block building and build condos or something, like tract housing. Those may, depending on the acreage, depending on how many units you can yield on that acreage, you may see real estate value. But the cost of demolition in those cases is going to be something that takes away from resale value. And if we're looking at, so the two possibilities here are Curtis Corner. Demolition and construction of housing on that site is going to yield depending on where the lines are drawn, remember that property is part of one large tract that goes all the way back to the fields and all
Right,
the way
but-
over the South Road. Depending on how much acreage goes with it, your yield is going to determine how much you can get for the sale of that property. I'm not anticipating that if we were to demolish Curtis Corner,
Regardless
and
of
not do
how
South
much
Road,
it's worth.
Yep.
Right? So I'm not getting into the granular, how hard is it going to be to sell, how much are we going to make. Regardless of that, will the money from that be applied to the bonding?
My point in getting into some level of granularity is that I'm not anticipating great sale value. We're not going to see a lot of money coming at us. Where it's applied is not going to turn out to be a big deal because I don't anticipate we're going to see millions of dollars coming to the town because of the sale of Curtis Corner. And Columbia Street's more difficult in many ways. So it's hard to know what that is. The real value in the redevelopment of those sites, either one of them, is going to be what comes onto the property tax, what comes onto the grand list. That's where the offset
But even
and the
say
cost.
you sold the high school for $2 million.
I don't think we're going to sell the high school for $2 million.
Okay. Suppose we sell it for $500,000, right? So that could be applied to some of our debt servicing, right? Or some part of our debt.
Sure. It's revenue to the town, and it's available for either for operation or for a debt service. And it would make sense to spend down or pay down some of the debt.
Any other questions? Michelle?
Marianne, part of the I want to make sure that I'm clear on this, that's all. Part of the requirements of applying to the state for this, like bond money from that big bond issue and the extra points that, that we get above the 35%, was that there was going to be a requirement for, I believe the number was 3% for regular ongoing maintenance. Now, that 3% would come out of our operating budget, am I correct? Not a capital budget.
It could come out of a capital budget, it could come out of an operating budget, and could come out of the debt and principal interest payment on what we used for these construction of these bonds. So as long as it's involving the maintenance of the building, it could be something as simple as painting a wall and the paint to buy it, or if we need to replace a heating ventilator, 5 years later, that's in the capital budget. That allows anything that we're doing to maintain the buildings.
So Marianne has just described an important policy decision that the school committee and the council will have to wrestle with in the future. That 3% mandated maintenance of the buildings can be covered simply by the debt payments. You need not invest a single dollar in maintaining the building if you're paying the debt on the building maintenance or repairs that you've expended bonds for. That means we could be in a situation where we assume that that's all our contribution. We're going to do 3% because that's what we're putting into the bonds and be done with it. I wouldn't recommend it, but the state law allows that.
And is that 3% of, help me out, please?
The operating budget.
And it's
Right. We're at 2% this year? 1.5? I think we're 2 this year. It may be 2 next. 2 next year.
Other questions on or points on the CIP presentation?
Right.
I just have one quick question, Marianne. We talked about the up to 50%. In this particular, I don't know what page it's on, it's called Building with Us. I'm assuming that the reason that it's only at potentially 50 and not the 52.5 that we had been talking about in the past is that we don't have issues with like decreasing overcrowding as one of them, or we're not going to be able to increase utilization, right? Okay. Just wanted to clarify that. only because for the longest time we've been saying that you can get 50% of what your current max reimbursement rate is of 35, which put us at 52.5.
All right, with that, I'll let Rob.
Right. Well, I'll start by pointing out that this is the second in our CIP meetings. There is a third CIP meeting tomorrow night. That's going to be the capital improvement program for the other departments here in town, and we'll go over the CIP in much more detail tomorrow night than we are tonight. Really, tonight's focus is the school program. Tonight's objectives really are for us to just sort of describe the framework within which the CIP has been developed, to sort of provide some anchors for understanding the capital improvement program that's been laid out in that CIP, and to sort of provide some frames. And I think that this is an important piece for us to focus on, because this is still an evolving project. This is still a changing, shifting project, and it's going to be contentious. I mean, as we get into the numbers, this is a big project. It's a big undertaking for the community. Again, I think we can succeed here, but it's going to take our really listening to everybody, our figuring out how to accommodate the concerns of everybody in the community, because I think there are some real concerns that need to be addressed as we go forward, not only on the education side, but on the trade-offs that have to be made by taxpayers as we commit $85 million for this much-needed improvement to our facilities. I think it's important to note in all of these meetings, whenever we do budgets, that budgets are moral documents. They reflect our objectives in the short run, they reflect our goals, and they reflect our long-term and prevailing values. The numbers that we put on a page tell the world and tell ourselves what we think is important, who we think is worthy, and how we think we can secure the rewards of this joint enterprise that we've all engaged in. I love this slogan. This is actually the school department slogan, a collaborative community where all means all. I think we should adopt it. I think this is right, and I think that it means all of us. This whole community is one big happy family at this point, right? And we want to stay that way. We've got to consider how to make sure that we're not in this discussion about a very important project alienating each other. We are at a crossroads. We are contemplating one of the biggest projects in the history, if not the biggest project in the recent history, certainly, of the town. And what we do this year, the project that we define through the capital improvement program and the project that gets defined through the school building recommendations to the school committee, is going to have an implication, going to have an impact on the community, multiple impacts on the community for decades to come. This is a really big deal. So I want to talk about storytelling. I want to talk about the need to talk about these things in a unifying way. The educational psychologist Howard Gardner has suggested that effective storytelling is a defining characteristic of leaders and leaderships in all fields. In his study of leaders from science and religion and politics, Gardner found that effective leaders habitually pull together threads of existing narratives, and they recast those disparate parts as a whole. When we're dealing with a project that big, that's what we need to be doing. We need to be listening to everybody and incorporating their ideas into a unified whole. This is not easy. One of the dangers, one of the challenges democratic societies have always faced is that genuine equality means that leadership pops up all over the place. It pops up today on Facebook every day. Leadership from everywhere means that we've got disparate stories, competing stories. We've got charges of ill will. We've got deliberate manipulation or accusations of deliberate manipulation, fake news about what's going on. People challenge each other's motives and intents. The politics of an open society can become disorienting and destructive. We see it in the nation today. We need to avoid it here. We need to figure out how not to do that. There's nothing new here. Soren Kierkegaard, 19th century philosopher, called this the dizziness of freedom. And Rollo May in the 1950s is saying that this anxiety we feel in public life is because our ideas are being challenged. We've got to figure out how to challenge each other's ideas, how to get to the root, to get to the real answer without disorienting, destructing, and demoralizing one another. Anxiety is avoided by reducing the threat each side poses to the ideas and the values of the other side. While complete integration of everybody's idea may not be possible, we have to do everything we can during the course of this year to make sure that those of us who are involved in building this narrative avoid dismissiveness, they're never going to vote for it, and avoid disparagement. They don't know what they're talking about. We've got to figure out how to really incorporate everybody. All means all, and it's got to mean all as we go forward this year. Linda likes to say there's a lot of new around this table, and that's true. And one of the things that I think we've got to be aware of is that we're coming into a new version of civil life in South Kingstown. A lot of people have told me, we never used to have politics. It's all Facebook's fault. Some have said, it's all your fault, Rob. The idea that there's been no politics here isn't correct. There have clearly been winners and losers and justifications for the allocation of resources forever in South Kingstown, right back to 1723. There's nothing new about politics, but the way we are doing it as a community right now is probably new. And we've got to figure out how to be new and have this conversation in a way that is productive and not destructive. How do we do this so that with the new voices around the room and this big issue that we got to deal with, we're not hurting each other, we're not tearing each other apart? In my view, the tools are the rules. And the first most important tool is a tool that you guys spend an extraordinary amount of time trying to teach our kids. Critical thinking is critical to our success here. We're going to have to figure out how to really not have platitudes be the answer. We're going to have to get down under each of those ideas and understand and make the other guys see what's going on here. We have to have a conversation that's genuine in the community about the benefits that are going to be realized and the costs that are coming with this thing. This thing's got good and bad. And if either one of the sides decides, I'm going to pretend that the bad stuff doesn't exist, or I'm going to pretend that the good stuff isn't going to happen, we're not going to succeed. We're not going to succeed. We need to figure out how to do this together. And to do that, we're going to have to figure out how to have critical conversations respectfully. Another of the tools is epistemology. This is education theory, right? This is everything. It's how do you know, and how do you test what you think you know? Decision science has evolved out of epistemology. It's the study of the application of techniques to inform decision-making at the individual and population level. That includes town population level. In business, public policy, military strategy, computer science, and artificial intelligence. One of the tools that's come out of decision science is this idea of a decision onion. These concentric rings represent, on the one side, sort of individual characteristics, the philosophies that individual voters, individual citizens come to the debate, come to the discussion with, as well as their reasoning styles. Are they deductive reasoners? Are they inductive reasoners? We are all emotive reasoners on some level. Everybody on some level is human and is emotive. We're about emotion. But how do we think? Now, it's important, I think, as we have this conversation to recognize that both of these styles, inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning, are valid. Just because somebody is focused more on the words and the logic instead of the numbers and the measurement doesn't mean that one side is right or the other side is wrong. These are both absolutely valid ways to get to the truth. And we've got to figure out how to make sure that we're recognizing, acknowledging, and embracing that as we go forward. Because we've already seen it. We've already seen on Facebook and in some of these meetings, you don't know what you're talking about, the numbers speak to this. Or, I just want to do what's right for the kids, and that's that. And we can't end the discussions there. We've got to get down, do some critical thinking, and have the conversations in meaningful ways. The other part of, or another element of this decision onion are the institutional pieces. The institutional pieces deal with how we have what's the right analysis, the level of analysis. Should we be thinking about the school kids now or school kids over the next 15 years? What's the measurement that we're going to use in our discussion? It's the way that we validate or invalidate, attack or critique the other arguments being advanced. The idea of one theory or another theory being used as the basis for the decision. The short-term and the long-term issue is important in a couple of ways. What do we want? Do we want a 20-year bond? Do we want a 30-year bond? How long do we want to stretch out the pain of this debt is an important question for us to answer, and it's one that we want to focus on as part of this discussion. But we also have to recognize that different citizens have different time frames. If you're a 35-year-old mother of an elementary school child, a 20-year bond is one thing. If you're a 70-year-old in retirement, living on a fixed income, a 20-year bond is a very different thing. We've got to recognize that everybody in town comes at this whole discussion from a different time perspective. It's important for us to keep that in mind. Now, as for the institutional stuff in general, one of the primary tools that people use to understand how public debate around public policies happens is this advocacy coalition framework. The advocacy coalition framework is a model of how we engage in public discussions. From an objective observer's point of view, we ask, how do advocates successfully set the agenda, form policy, and build institutions? Now, this is really the way most of us experience politics and policymaking in America. It's a food fight. How do we define the successful advocates? And quite often, the techniques aren't techniques that are beneficial. It's an inherently competitive model of human behavior. It is the adversarial advocacy model of getting things done. I'm right and you're wrong. Let me tell you all the ways. And if I can convince 51% of the people that I am right and you are wrong, I win. We go home. It is not a healthy way for us to deal with this discussion as we go forward. We want to look for a way to get everybody involved. And the other side of the model is cooperation, collaboration happens. It happens because groups have to form these coalitions in order to beat the other side. I'd suggest that one of the things that we need to be thinking as we go forward this year is how to form a collaborative effort to beat the odds, to be successful in a project that is not going to be easy for us to accomplish. There are three questions that the advocacy model, and really any model dealing with politics or policy making, deals with, and that is this. What do people want and need? Who gets what from whom? That's what law tells us. Law is all about the allocation of resources. Who gets what from whom? The law says you have to pay your taxes, and most recently at the national level, a lot of guys who have big bank accounts don't have to pay as much as they had to, right? The law tells us who gets what from whom. Politics tells us why. What's the justification? What's the rationalization that we put to that allocation formula? There are really only three variations. There's a lot of manifestations of this. But there's only really three base answers to the question why. One, because we think the person, people, group, class that's getting it is worthy. Two, we think they need it. They're just vulnerable and they need our help. Or three, it's smart because it's going to help everybody. We hear all of these three arguments all the time. We will hear these three arguments with regard to an $85 million project to support the schools. In fact, one can certainly argue that the students are worthy. One can certainly argue that the students are in need in South Kingstown, and we can certainly make the argument that investing in our schools is going to improve property values, is going to improve the quality of the community for everybody. We're all better off because of it. But those bold statements by themselves don't prove anything. We need to go beyond simple heuristics. We can't just live with those assertions. They may be all absolutely true, but they're not enough. A heuristic is a shortcut. And there are useful heuristics, and there are heuristics that aren't useful at all. A useful heuristic is the rule of 72. This is a way to determine very ballpark estimate of how long it's going to take to double your money. If you divide the percentage number, again, 72 by the percentage number, you get how long it's going to take you to double your money in any investment. 72 divided by 4%, 18 years to double your money. Stereotypes are not a helpful heuristic. Largely not helpful because they just don't wash. They don't prove to be beneficial very often. They prove to be wrong, maybe as more often than they are correct, but we still use them. Knowing the difference is not easy because they feel right. Soldiers, firefighters, and EMTs are worthy. Students are vulnerable. It's wise to invest in our children because they are the future. These statements can be 100% true, and they still don't tell us how much we should spend or how we should proceed. What should our policy be? They don't help us. We can't end our discussion, we can't end our debates on that. This is a very popular meme out there right now. It sort of summarizes the same idea. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I will point out that it's everywhere. And it embodies a fallacy that unless you're going to critique it, unless you're going to go into it, isn't apparent. It says everybody should be able to reach the apple. The problem is it presumes 3 extra boxes. It presumes resources from outside the system. We can't just accept that we want this outcome without identifying where those additional resources are going to come from. And where they come from is outside of the Educational Opportunities Program. They come from, in this case, public safety resources. They come from public access to open space. They come from affordable housing. They come from private life. At the end of the day, we just want to do what's right for the kids. We hear this all the time, and it is a statement with which I think everybody in the room would agree. But we don't know what it means. At least for some kids, when we take money from the family to give to the schools, that means there's less available for the kids at home. If we take $500 in tax money from a family, that means they can't go on vacation, potentially. It means they can't go to the movies because we may have done harm to a family by taking the money with the intent of doing good. And we've got to think about that as we go forward. How much should we spend on education? Well, we should spend as much as is necessary. But how much is necessary? What do we mean by necessary? What do we mean by success? How do we measure success? These are underlying questions that we have to address as we go forward. With regard to buildings, this is an open question. What we need is not absolutely perfectly clear. After a year plus, I don't know that the school building committee can truly tell us we know what we need. I don't know that we're there yet. One of the biggest experts in the field at this point is this architect Nair, who points out that you don't have to spend big money to achieve good outcomes. It's okay to start small, he says. It's okay to do incremental improvements. Now, we've got a rare opportunity right now. The state is giving away money. That's a big deal. But that money isn't the only way we can succeed. The experts in this field tell us we could succeed incrementally if we had to. That's important for us to know. We may find ourselves having to do some version of incrementalism. It's not a disaster if we can't get $85 million. It's not a disaster if we can't do this one big shot deal. We can succeed if we put our minds to it and focus on the big things that we know the state's going to give us money for and the little things that we have to take care of over time. What do we mean by success? Success does not mean a big, new, shiny building, according to Nair. Success means focusing on what makes you distinct. What is your self-identity? Nair says, things like sculptures and artwork. Yeah, they sound small. But it's those elements in a building, it's those elements in a space that can actually make people feel engaged in the building. These things can be a big deal. We don't have to feel like if we don't get a brand new building down on Curtis Corner, all is lost. The community is ruined forever. We can succeed in multiple ways. One of the problems with traditional schools, says Nair, is that they're isolated from the community. This is probably a part of success that we really need to focus on. What he's saying here is that schools succeed when the communities show up at the schools. When the communities not only are using the buildings, but feel attached to the buildings in some way. Adult education classes, group events, town events in the buildings. Having the schools become community learning centers is a big deal. It means everybody gets something for it. The 70-year-old who is taking an adult ed class in that new school is benefiting directly from that program. Thinking about how we're going to use the schools going forward is also an important part of what we should be doing over the course of the next year. Back to the decision onion, there's one last piece that we haven't talked about, and that is the information types. What kinds of information are we going to rely on as we go forward to prove that we've got this right? To prove that this is the right project, the right way to design, the right way to go ahead and spend $85 million. Decision science deals with probabilities, not certainties. We're never going to know for sure that we've got it absolutely right. What we will be able to tell people if we do our work well is that we know our answers are reasonable, that they're supported by facts, and that they're going to help make a useful contribution for the kids, for this community, for all of this stuff. We can't just say we know that it's going to improve property values. We've got to be able to demonstrate how it's going to improve property values. There are three major theories that folks rely on when talking about public policy generally and this project in particular: economic theory, cost benefit, price signals, rational utilization, maximization. Education theories get pulled in quite a bit, although I will tell you I'm disappointed with how far we've pulled education theory in and how much we've been able to engage the community in a discussion about these education theories. We also talk quite a bit about design theory and what the design, the aesthetics of the building are going to mean for citizens, for students. There is an economic theory there is a whole literature, I should say, that says that there is a benefit. If you invest in schools, if you improve rundown schools in inner cities in particular, things get better. There is a limit built into this literature. There is a declining marginal return on the investment of dollars into school buildings. In wealthy or better off, not poor, school districts, in schools that are not terrible, that aren't, dangerous, that aren't falling apart, that have heating systems at work, there isn't actually a big effect. So we're not in a situation where we have to do this or all is ruined, all is gone, all is lost. We're in a situation where we can make improvements without fear that we have to do it because the education of our children is at stake. Curtis Corner, if we do an addition to Curtis Corner, if all it got was a light touch, the literature doesn't suggest that we've ruined the 9th grade, if that's where they happen to be. The literature suggests that in a reasonably well-off district, and we are that, with buildings that are not dangerous, modest improvements are probably enough. Price signals is one of the weirdest things with education. People like to talk about this statistic in particular. Everybody likes to say the cost per pupil is too high, the cost per pupil is too high, and they take it as a real measure of what's going on in schools. Cost per pupil is not a statistic or a measure of the factors of production in education. You might as well use the statistic cost per number of cars in the parking lot at Belmont, because kids don't factor into the cost of education any more than the cars at the parking lot in Belmont do. What drives the cost of education are teacher salaries, textbooks, educational space, lights, heat, all of the things that actually go into producing an hour of instruction. It's not the kids. Statistic also sounds like it's something that's very comparable, but the truth of the matter is, while we're moving toward uniform charts of accounts, the way that districts report these numbers are radically different and comparisons are difficult. They're all problematic. So the idea that you can let customers sort of decide what's going on in education and that you're going to have a utility maximization happening by consumers in public education doesn't work. This theory just doesn't really have much application in education. Students are the customer here, but they don't pay for the service. What constitutes good customer service in public education is not defined by the customer. It's defined by policymakers. The customer doesn't have to make trade-offs. The kids don't have to decide whether to give something up in order to have something show up at their school. So rational utilization isn't something that really happens very much here in this context. So moving to the theories of education theory and the claims made here, education literature on the multiple intelligences, learning modalities, and intrinsic motivations deals primarily with modes of instruction, the way that teachers teach. It has a lot less to say about the facilities. There's some there, and I'll talk about that in a couple of slides, but there's not a lot. It's mostly about how you engage students one-on-one, how to have the instruction happen. It's not about the space in which that instruction happens. The relationship between form and function, architects such as Nair, Fielding, and Lackney claim that the existing school designs do not support new or emerging practices in education. They point to the theories described on the previous page, learning modalities, multiple intelligences, and intrinsic interests, as evidence that we need to change our buildings. The teaching has changed, or the practice of teaching has changed, and the structures no longer meet those teaching expectations. You can't teach a circle sharing group in a square room. The concept is that teaching has changed so substantially that it cannot be done in the spaces that we have in our buildings today. This claim is highly contestable. It's not really supported by empirical evidence. It's not an indispensable, and it's certainly not a parsimonious application of the education theories to which it refers. And it is not internally consistent with design theory itself, which provides that the form should follow actual practice, not some hypothesized ideal practice. So the design stuff isn't there for us yet, except perhaps on this next level. The claim that there is something about a beautiful building or about a beautiful space that inspires people, that increases performance, has been tested. And there is some evidence that color and light characteristics, temperature, air quality, ownership, feeling comfortable in a space, does in fact improve student performance, actual studies on that, and work performance. There is some evidence that the quality of the space improves things. But we're back to the sort of firefighters and soldiers are good thing. It doesn't tell us how we should get to that. We don't necessarily need to demolish a building and build a new building to improve the quality of light, the color, the sense of ownership and comfort. This doesn't tell us how we should go about implementing the new policies. I'm going to skip over these next two slides. They should have been pulled. This is sort of an important concept, too, because all of these things happen in a layered way. We tend to think about schools and roads and recreation separately, but they're all very interconnected. And when we separate them, when we try to do them in serial, inevitably something gets shortchanged inadvertently. We've already decided to spend that dollar, so it's not available for the next thing, and we've never had the conversation about which of those we would have preferred if we had talked about them in unison. We need to be cognizant of the fact that we have to talk about these things, all of these things, the myriad things that the town needs, together. They're trade-offs. You get apples, you get bananas, but you can't go beyond your budget line, you can't go beyond your income constraints. That's true for public services and private services. Every dollar that we spend on private services is a dollar that cannot be spent. Every dollar we spend on public services is a dollar that the citizen, the taxpayer, cannot spend themselves on activities that they would like to spend it on. The same is true for debt service and instructional services. Every dollar that we spend on debt service for the schools is a dollar that will not be available for operational expenditures at some point in the future. We are constrained. The only way to avoid that trade-off is to jump to a new income line. In our case, a new tax rate. And the problem with jumping to a new tax rate is there are some people who live on this budget constraint, who live down in here, who can't get here comfortably. This is the CIP that we've proposed for the next 6 years. Total CIP of $90 million. The bulk of that is the $85 million project, $78 million of which is bonded. For the school projects, $6.5 million for municipal improvements that we will discuss here in this room tomorrow night. This is what the projected debt service will be per household. The red lines on this graph are what the debt service would be if we were to receive $0 from the state of Rhode Island. The blue is what we will actually have. So as you can see, in 2025, the taxes will have gone up, will go up in that year. These are annual increases. I'll show them as cumulative on the next slide, but these are annual increases. So in next year, the anticipated increase in the property tax that is associated with debt service will be $78. It goes up to an annual increase of $205 in 25-26. Cumulatively, that looks like this. You will note that that is bumping right up against $1,000 in 25-26, because the 78 is the base for the next year, and the 156 is added to that base. Then on top of that, you add the 163 the year after that. In that 6-year period, the cumulative effect for debt service is that we will have increased taxes on the typical home of $152,000 by $1,000 roughly. Oh, I'm going backwards. Sorry.
What did you say the typical, that's based on the typical home value of what?
352. These numbers also have been bouncing around in South Kingstown for a while, but we used 352 for that calculation. This is the property tax increase that we can expect annually just because of the increase in the cost of operations. The blue bar on this page is the tax increase if we were to hold ourselves to inflation, 2%, no more. If operational costs at the municipal side and on the school side stayed at 2%, then we're looking at a tax increase, an inflationary tax increase on the typical $352,000 home of $100, 100 and change per year. If we were to go to the 4% legal cap, that's the orange line, we begin to see $200, $250. Again, these are somewhat compounding. So, did we? We don't have our cumulative for that. The net effect of having that property tax increase of $100 over that 5-year period, 6-year period, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years is $600 at 2%. You add that to the $1,000 increase, you're looking at about a $1,500 tax difference between this year and 25-26 if we hold the line on spending on the operations to 2% on both the municipal side and the school side. If we can't hold it, then we are going to be somewhere between the inflationary rate, $1,500, $1,600, and the higher number, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. We're closer to $2,200 over that same period of time. 25-26 tax bill would be $2,200 higher than your tax bill this year. These are big numbers. I'm going to get into how big those numbers are for some of us in just a second. I'm going to skip through these. Before I get into sort of why that number makes me nervous, I want to talk about the fact that there's some indicators that say we shouldn't be all that worried about this level of debt. It's important to know that debt service is the amount needed to pay principal and interest. Bonded debt is our most common form of debt. We borrow in other ways. We take loans out. We do have credit cards, but bonded debt is really where it's all at. That's what we do when we borrow money. We issue bonds, and buyers of bonds are our creditors. We get the money from the market. The ability to pay is an important thing for us to keep in mind because it means two different things. The ability to pay is the ability of the municipality to pay back the holders of those bonds. It's also the ability of taxpayers to pay the tax levy necessary to cover those bonds. There are two very different things. By the first measure, whether the municipality can afford to borrow, we are golden, guys. The bond market, the financial institutions out there are willing to give South Kingstown money. We've got a great credit rating. We can take out as many credit cards as we want. We can afford $90 million by the metrics that the financial industry has put out there. It's important to remember, though, that these metrics are not metrics that are designed to do us any favors. They're metrics designed to tell those who lend money to us how likely it is that they will be repaid. So when Moody's says, go ahead, you can lend them $90 million, they'll repay you. Moody's doesn't care if we have to do tax foreclosures and sell homes in order to make those payments. All they care about is whether or not we have a method, a means, a way of making the repayment. And the answer is we absolutely, positively have got a way to do that. This is what we're proposing to borrow. At the high water mark, we're almost $9 million in gross debt service. That's pretty steep. But again, when we net out what the state is willing to give us, we come down to $2,550,000. The state money makes a big difference in this analysis. Debt service as a percentage of tax levy, again, 3%. This is a very low number. When you look at other municipalities, we can easily, again, as far as the financial industry, as far as government organizations are concerned, these numbers are not at all frightening. We can afford to borrow $90 million by these metrics. Debt per capita, again, these are not scary numbers. This is doable. This is one that we focused on quite a bit last year, and I want to talk about it again here tonight. This is an interesting metric. It says you shouldn't exceed 10% of your operating expense for debt service. No more than 10% of your operating budget should go to servicing principal and interest. If we received no state funding, we'd be at 9.58 under the program that's been put together for this CIP. But with the state funding, we're at 2.73, nowhere near that 10% metric. What's more, the financial industry isn't even really using this metric because they're not sure it's as useful as they thought it was in past years. This is where it is. We were talking previously about the debt associated with tax rate associated or tax increase associated with debt. This is the tax increase for, again, that house of $52,000 in value at 2%. The cumulative effect is $600 over that period, that 6-year period of time, and the cumulative effect for the 4% would be $1,200 and some odd, $300. This brings us to the bad news. While the municipality, as a town, as a municipal corporation can clearly deal with the debt load, all of the indicators are we're good. All lights are green. It's not clear that everybody in town can afford the tax increase, whether it's $1,500 or $2,000 necessary to support our debt service. 1/3 of the households in South Kingstown earns less than $50,000 a year. 1/3 of the households in South Kingstown has a household income of less than $50,000. That's a big chunk of our population living on relatively modest means. a big chunk of the housing stock is well below what we think of as the average value. The average value in South Kingstown for a home is $392 now. These numbers, as I was saying, Emily, shift all the time, and it depends on which agency you look at. This is the mean from our assessed values database. This is our data. This is the median, the mean value based on our numbers. Median is the other line over here. It's, I don't recall the exact number. I want to say it's, I'm not going to recall it. The important thing about this slide is about a third of our houses are way over on the low end of on the value side. What we're seeing here is that our averages and the things that we're basing a lot of our thinking in public policy on are skewed by this very long tail, $350 million plus homes. But the vast majority, 4,200, are worth less than or about less than 308 or 300 or below. A third, 4,000, folks with houses that are valued at $308,000. The 350 is dragging us to a different orientation. So I wanted to figure out whether this was just sort of folks who had old homes that they hadn't fixed up. I wanted to figure out whether this is maybe folks who are retired, who've been in the same home for 30 years and don't have a mortgage. It doesn't appear to be the case. This graph represents the number of the homes that have sold in South Kingstown over the last 5 years. This is about 1/5 of all homes in South Kingstown. About a fifth of the properties in South Kingstown have sold in the last 5 years, and as you can see, a large number of those homes are in the lower range as well. So we have folks who, in all likelihood, have bought into the market at the low end, who have mortgages, who are not going to be price resilient as taxes go up. That has all sorts of implications for us. This, by the way, is a map of Wakefield. All three colors on this map, the red, the blue, and the green, represent properties that are valued less than the low or moderate income price set by the state. The red ones are those that are deed restricted and are qualified for state programs. The blue ones are ones that have sold in the last 3 years for less than the lower moderate income price, but are not deed restricted. And the green properties are properties that are assessed at less than that value, which for this map was $329,000. So trying to estimate what all this means for these folks, the first place to start is the Tybo hypothesis. Tybo was an economist back in the 50s who said, people vote with their feet. If you raise taxes too much, people will leave. People shop around, they look for the best suite of services, the best schools, the best recreation programs, the best beaches, and they then try to figure out where they can get that mix for the lowest price. If prices get too high, people just leave. Over time, what Tybo says is you end up with a community of people who have the same preferences, everybody who's looking for schools, everybody who's looking for beaches, whatever it may be, and they all have the same tolerance for the tax price, the tax level. If we're trying to be a community that works for all, if we're really trying to do equity for all, if we want to have low and moderate income families here, then raising the taxes is moving in the wrong direction. Driving tax rates up doesn't help us achieve that objective. If what we're trying to do, and I've seen some of the comments coming in on recent requests for information about what folks would like to see in town, more diversity, more economic, more ethnic diversity, more economic diversity. We're not going to get more diverse folks if we're driving the price of living here up. We've got to keep in mind that all of these things are interconnected. Having a good high school is an attractor. Having high taxes isn't. It's a detractor. So the question is, how do we balance these things? The next issue that we have to keep in mind is this idea of crowding out. You know, if we use the money or require property owners to use the money in order to do a tax bill, then they're not going to have that money to do what they'd like to do. And what you tend to see is disinvestment. And with property taxes, you tend to see a particular type of disinvestment. You see people not investing in their properties. You see people who say, look, the tax man can't come into my house, so I'll improve the interior, but I'm not going to paint the porch. I'm not going to fix the house. This is a threat to the integrity of the community. So I'm going to wrap up with a few cautionary notes beyond those, and that is this. History suggests that we're overdue for an economic adjustment. We're 10 years into an expansion. The last time that has happened is never. Despite a decade of expansion, wages have not grown as quickly as the cost of land or consumer goods and services. Income data for South Kingstown suggests that our community reflects and is not immune from the national trend toward increased income inequality. An economic slowdown will be particularly hard on those who have purchased real estate near the height of the market but have not seen increases in their wages and are not benefited from private investment. South Kingstown's financial structure is particularly fragile in my view. We're not replacing old debt with new debt. The only place we have to go is services. We can't just repurpose old debt payments. We have to cut into programs, whether those are school programs or municipal programs, or we have to go to the taxpayer. We have no other place to go. We have no debt to retire that we can sort of replace with new debt. If we're going to position ourselves as a place that's attractive to young families, we have to consider all of this in relationship to the new economic reality for young people. Millennials have huge student loans, and the barriers to entry in homeownership are higher than they used to be. Driving prices even further north is not going to help us attract young people. A substantial part of a tax base is susceptible to catastrophic climate impacts. I don't want to overstate this, but we are a beach community. A large percentage, we noted that long tail of $350 million plus homes, those are on the beach. We have some vulnerability. Our tax roll is not necessarily resilient, as resilient as some other places. There's another metric that we haven't used here, and I won't get into it in great detail, but one of the things that the financial industry, which we don't actually score very well on, looks at is how much of your property tax levy is paid for by a small number of wealthy property owners. Typically what you see in a healthy, good mix is a large factory owner, a large corporate headquarters, a large set of business entities. In South Kingstown, we don't have that. Our highest taxpayers we have a few that are business taxpayers, but we go right into the residential taxpayers as our largest taxpayers very quickly. The apartments are particularly big. Finally, one thing that we should be cautious of, I think, is that the state's financial environment is not particularly good either. I don't think that we should be panicked about the state reneging on promises, but the environment for the state's fiscal environment is not particularly, I don't get a warm and fuzzy from it. There is no magic number. Every dollar we borrow requires a reduction in current program spending or an increase in taxes. That's just the way it is. We don't have old debt that we can retire and put into new service. Every reduction in a program obviously has impacts on the program participants and on municipal employees, and every increase in the taxes has direct impacts on property owners. I'm going to leave it at that.
Rep, could you just clarify the 1,500 to the 22, the range between the 1,500 and the 2,200, if we had gone up to the 4%, or the $1,500 if we held on the municipal and the school budget sides operationally at 2%? On those numbers, are you looking at before the 50% reimbursement, or is that after the 50% reimbursement by the state?
No, that's a very good point. It's net of the state reimbursement. It's after the state reimbursement.
Okay.
Sorry, my voice is a little froggy right now. I just want to point out, and maybe it's something that needs to be discussed, is that it's not the concern of this meeting or this joint group to determine what is considered the best learning environment and experience. We entrust Superintendent Savasano to utilize the best decision-making process and theory for the education our kids are getting. That is her lane, and I think it's important to note that, because we did spend a lot of time hearing about the different decision-making approaches that can be used when it comes to determining like your educational philosophy. And I just think it's important to note that that's just not our decision at this joint table.
If I may, I think that's an absolutely valid point, and I agree with you. We have to rely on the experts, in this case, the superintendent. When I'm talking about bridge reconstruction, it's John Schock. We have to rely on people who know their field and can come up with the best possible plan. However, we all do, as public servants, have an obligation to explain that plan so that the public understands that we're spending their money well.
I can certainly recognize that as well. I just think it can get a little dangerous, a little kludgy when it becomes a discussion of, what is the minimal investment we can make and our kids are still going to survive? Because that's really that's not what should be driving our decision, because it's not our decision to make. It's Superintendent Savastano's and her teams. And it kind of reminds me of, like, when I was a younger mother, had babies and little ones, and people would always say, oh, well, we did this with our kids and they survived. And like, that is such a bare minimum goal. Like, I don't want to look at this as, oh, we could just get by with this and they'll survive, they'll be fine. We want them to thrive. We can't afford a Cadillac, but we want them to thrive. And I feel like an overwhelming tone has been doom and gloom of like, what is the minimum we can skate by with and our kids will be fine. At some point, are we ever going to talk about the incredible upside to this? Because it has been a good long time since this town has really invested in the schools. I am going to live here for every year of this bond. I'm going to feel every year of the compounding effect. We owe it to the town and the kids. And I would just like to begin perhaps with turning around the tone of the way we are even presenting this. This is an opportunity. This is not just some ridiculous burden. This is an opportunity. I just really felt the need to point that out, because I am going to feel this. I am definitely going to feel this, and it is still an honor and a responsibility. And then the last thing I wanted to note was, there is someone with a phone in the audience that is just going off the chains, beeping, and it's super distracting. And I just wonder if you could silence it, because it's really hard to concentrate. And I'm wondering how much you're even paying attention if your phone's going off that much.
So, Mr. President, if I may, I deeply respect those comments. I think you're exactly right that that it's incumbent upon us to describe the good that comes of it. It's also incumbent upon us to describe the potential problems we're causing our fellow citizens. I don't have to decide, I can't decide what we should do here. What I can do is lay out data that I don't think folks are aware of. I don't think that anyone walking into the room, certainly when I looked at the data, didn't recognize that a third of the folks in South Kingstown live in households with an income less than $50,000. That number was truly surprising to me. And that does change how we should, I think, change the way we think about what an extra $1,500, actually their taxes are probably going to be less than that. We don't have perfect modeling here. But a tax bill of $800 or $1,000 is going to do for a family like that. It's both sides. And again, I'm not trying to portray this as we can't do this. I honestly believe that if we design this well, we can do this without doing harm to taxpayers. But we're going to have to make sure that we're paying attention to both sides of that balancing act.
How hard would it excuse me, I think we've all got frogs in our throats up here. how hard would it be to develop some modeling for what the actual tax burden would be on, say, the bottom third? Like, I'm assuming many of these people who are $50,000 or less in income are renting, as still they're going to be paying property tax increases as
Right.
landlords raise their rents.
That's correct.
But is there any way to model those?
Yes, but we're going to have to make some assumptions. We're going to have to sort of pick targets. We're not going to be able to tie the income data to the household data. There's no data set that we can go to and say census comports with our local assessor's data in the file. There's no crosswalk. So we'd have to make some assumptions, and we could build some models around hypothetical people in those ranges. That we can do.
Yeah, I think that would be informative.
I think so too.
And another thing, I think, the last time we were all gathered together, last year, we were talking about goals and objectives, and I think part of the goals that we were talking about related to tax base, because, part of our way out of this beyond raising taxes is increasing the tax base. And that means development of some kind or another. And so what strategies do we foresee coming along in that direction, developing more housing, whether it's affordable or not, and commercial?
Right. So this is on commercial, so there's a couple of things. One, the time frame issue becomes real because for us to change zoning and to sort of see commercial development happen, it's got a fairly long lead time. Our zoning, right now, 1% of the land land area in South Kingstown is zoned commercial. About 3% is zoned commercial, mixed use, or industrial. We've got a very small part of our town that is committed to business uses. We're going to have to change the zoning. It's a year. And then we're going to have to see what happens in the marketplace. That's going to take some time for the rezoned properties to start working their way into use. So, yes, we need to be doing that. The rezoning process, particularly around mixed use and multifamilies in the Old Tower Hill Road area, is underway. The planning board is working on that at this point. Hopefully, we'll be able to see something happen on mixed-use commercial this year on rezoning. And then the question is going to be, what do the realtors do? What do the investors do? What's the state of the market when all of that, is beginning to happen? We could see some development in the next 3, 4, 5 years that is beneficial. And yes, every bit of development is going to have a benefit to this project, to the community. I mean, the truth of the matter is there's only 3 places to go for increases in revenue. You can either take it out of existing tax payers, increase everybody's value or increase the tax rate. You can look for new taxpayers, recruit new people into the town, or you can take it from existing programs. Cut the school budget, cut the DPS budget, You can only do those 3 things. That's the only way you can do it. You either cut program, take it out of the taxpayers, or find new taxpayers. So yes, we have to figure out how to grow the town in order to grow the tax base. Now, that's an important thing for us to be thinking about. How much growth do we want? Where do we want it? And is this the right project for us to be, doing this for? Or is there something that's a different mix that works better? I don't know the answer to those questions, but those are the questions that we're going to have to wrestle with.
I mean, the important question that we already have the answer to me is that our schools have not been maintained and the work has to be done no matter what. So one way or another, work has to be done to bring our schools up to 21st century learning standards and also deferred maintenance in order to continue on with an educational program that makes sense and where our kids are going to be prepared for the work and college force. So we know that the work has to be done. I feel like that's not really the question right now. The question is, do we want this to get this project moving along and be on a timeline to get 50% of it reimbursed to us by the state, or do we want to be all on our own to update our schools and to fix them? Because to fix our schools, to make sure that they have HVAC and are warm and dry and safe and all of those things that have been identified in the Jacobs report that we've been talking about for years now, that's great. We have to do that. But we also have a responsibility to our kids and to our taxpayers to make sure that we are delivering a program that is going to prepare our students. And that's not, and according to our educational experts in administration, that's not where we are right now with our buildings, and we have to get to that place. And that is our responsibility. So we really we have two things that we're looking at. We're looking at fixing our schools due to deferred maintenance from decades. And we also have a responsibility to make sure that our taxpayers are paying for buildings where our students are learning and are prepared. So if we take both of those, that's where we get to this number, and it's a huge number. I mean, there are lots of people that own lots of properties. That's going to be a number, as Stephanie said, it's going to be a number that we're going to feel the impact. But you're going to either feel the impact of doing those things at 100% of the cost, because we're going to have to do them one way or another unless we're just going to let them deteriorate, or we're going to do those things and we're going to get 50% reimbursement. Right. So as you said, it's really figuring out what's the best way to structure that debt so that all of our taxpayers, our residents, so forth, renters, feel the impact in a way that makes it so that they can still sustain a lifestyle that's fair. So that feels like that's a work in progress. We need to figure out how to structure the debt. That's not really whether we should have it or not. It's how does it get structured.
Mr. President, if I may, I agree with you, and I think that you point to an important thing that we still have to do some work on. The work needs to be done, but the public doesn't know what the work is. We haven't described that work in a way that, frankly, as a member of the school building committee, I mean, here tonight we have some, question about whether it's 15 or 5 or what we're spending. What is the work has not been well defined yet. And we do have an obligation over the course of the months and year ahead to make sure that the public fully understands the work that needs to be done. We haven't defined the work. It may be true that work needs to be done, but we haven't defined what it is that we need to do. We're still working on that. But we have that important task. We can't jump to the conclusion that this work needs to be done because we can't point to this yet. We don't know what the work is yet. And we're going to have to wrestle with that. We've put a tag on it, a price tag, $85 million, but we haven't defined the work yet. We have some concepts that we're working with, but we haven't nailed down what the work is. And I think that is important for us to figure out as we go forward.
Your comments up here at the table? I am curious to see what we think the differences would be between a 30-year and a 20-year bond. If we can look at what the market's doing right now,
yep,
that would be good. Because, I think there's a good case for the 30-year.
There is.
Especially if we want to keep those
That's correct.
lumps smaller on those cumulative bar graphs. And,
and if we get lucky, we're not looking at 4%. The model presumes a 4% interest rate. Right now, municipalities are getting bonds out there for 2.7. I mean, we may be substantially below 4. There's room for that. On the other hand, a year from now, who knows what's going to be happening in the municipal bond market? We don't know.
Right. Or the economy in general. I think if we chose to go with a 30-year, if the numbers look right, it gives us the opportunity to place more of a bet on ourselves that the policy changes that we make in terms of making this place more affordable and growing the tax base both commercially and in terms of the residential market here, that growth makes the ability to pay over 30 years easier.
I agree with that. I actually think that we're also in a period of transition, and we're very early in that period of transition. So I think you're right. I think 30 years from now, our grand list is going to be larger, certainly, than it is in 20 years, and the difference may be substantial. So I agree. We'll run those numbers. It will cost us more.
Rob, do you remember why we were advised against going for a 30 versus 20 in the past? I thought the previous financial person for the town had warned against going with a 30-year.
It just costs more, and I think that was her rationale. Again, by the metrics that the financial industry uses, the Moody's rating company, the folks who say these are good bonds, we don't have a problem. We can borrow $80, $85, $90 million. We can borrow more than that without the markets being upset. The markets are going to be fine when we go out and try to sell bonds for 80 or 85 or 90 million. My concern is that I'm not sure everybody in town is going to be able to carry that. And I take this idea of equity and policy for everybody very seriously. I think we have an obligation to take care of that 1/3 of the population that may have trouble. I think we've got to worry about that.
The other thing is, I didn't see anything really wrong with the tone. I think we're just trying to talk out what our differences are and trying to collaborate, and that's fine. The other thing, when it comes to talk about the bond or how much we're going to borrow, there is a certain point that a credit rating agency would look at our town and say, well, if they've always been an A+, now they're a B, as an example, and that could affect our overall borrowing.
Zach and I have talked about it. We've talked to our financial advisor about it. We've talked to bond counsel recently. We don't see it. We think we're fine as far as the financial markets go. We don't think that this puts South Kingstown in jeopardy of an injury to its credit rating. The only thing is some exogenous event, some disaster that does in fact take out a big taxpayer or something, a big number of taxpayers, something outside, a big change in the economy generally. There are, the state decides that it can't give any of the hotel tax or meal tax, or it starts retrenching revenues from the state. Those sorts of things could put us in jeopardy. This alone will not, as far as the financial markets are concerned.
One thing that you had mentioned in the beginning of your presentation was that the 3% maintenance cost of the buildings could be taken care of by the paying of the bond. I would personally, I don't know how anybody else feels about that, but to me that personally feels really irresponsible to do that. I think that has to be, or should be, just my personal opinion, built into the maintenance of the buildings. We're doing all this work, and then I would hate for, in 40 years, I don't know what generation we'd be at, grandkids or kids or whoever they'd be, sitting at this table saying that no one took care of these buildings for several decades, and now here we are back. So I just think it would be really irresponsible to not spend that 3% on actually maintaining the building.
We all agree with you. And Linda and Zach and Marianne and I sat down this morning, and that was one of the things we talked about.
That was just one of my first notes I wrote down. That
it was just that was a loophole the state put in there, which I don't know why they would do that, because
right. I remember that we've all talked about that you could do that, but I didn't know where, that we were in the discussion of if that's what we thought should happen or not.
Part of the thinking might be, you spend a lot of money, you get your buildings up to, spick and span. Maybe it takes 1% ongoing maintenance to keep them at a high level in the beginning. As time goes on, it goes up to 2 and then up to 3. And
probably wouldn't need to spend 3% that first year when you have just renovated the year before.
But I think you have to be super cautious with that concept too, because I don't think anyone intentionally wanted to not spend money on maintaining the buildings. No, I'm talking about maintaining the buildings in the past, right? So you look for different priorities and things that happen in reallocation of money, and you might say, okay, well, we'll catch up with it next year, but then next year you have some new thing that you have to pay for, and you don't. So I do think that you need to kind of keep that idea
Right, I don't
of...
think it's a blame game at
No, no,
all
no,
about,
I'm not-
I just
not
think
at all.
that we should learn from that.
Right.
I don't think anybody historically ever meant to not keep up with the.
No, the only reason I brought that up is because, we might say, okay, well, we're going to put it towards debt service as an example, right, for a few years. My fear would be that it continues to go towards debt service and doesn't go towards going to maintenance or putting it into the kitty, so that when you need to replace a roof or something major over time, that you don't want to end up in the same place that we are now.
Right, I just wouldn't want a structure where we are going under the guise that, we could just make sure we can use that 3% because.
I completely agree with that.
But yeah, no, I don't think anybody ever intentionally didn't keep up the buildings. I just think we should learn from.
I don't know. I think it was intentional when the state just said you can no longer spend money improving your buildings, but I don't know.
So, just one thought on that tension, though, is this. The numbers that we presented tonight, the 1,500 and the 2,200, are inflation, 2%, and the cap under state law. Staying at inflationary is going to be a challenge. It has been and will continue to be a challenge. Staying below inflation is really, really hard. I mean, we're looking at not seeing, 3%, 2.5% wage increases for municipal or school employees going forward. We're looking at things that are going to make it difficult. And the reason the state put that piece into law, that provision into law, is because they know that we're going to need some flexibility. And you're absolutely right. It's not the first place you go, and really you want to avoid it like the plague because you want to maintain your buildings. In fact, one of the things we were talking about is trying to figure out if there's a new design, institutional design, for how we do that going forward for all buildings, not just school buildings, but the municipality. Look, you go into the bathrooms here in Town Hall in South Kingstown, and they're not up to code either. I mean, we do not have buildings that are 21st century buildings in town, with the possible exception of the senior center and the rec center. We have to do something different than we have been doing. But there is going to be pressure. There's going to be a continuous pressure to take some of that 3% or some of that debt service as contribution toward the 3%. And we know it's there. It's going to be tempting.
Rob, at this point in time, are we guaranteed a reimbursement of 35% with the ability to get reimbursed up to 50%? If so, I'd like to expand on the model requested by Abel Collins to include 35% reimbursement, 40%, 45%, and 50%.
Okay.
Weren't we pretty much guaranteed by RIDE over a month ago that if we moved forward with putting the high school at Curtis Corner and became more efficient and got our largest, least efficient building offline and gave it back to the town, we were guaranteed? I thought I knew it was 52.5, but I heard it was 50 tonight. Were we guaranteed 50 or were we guaranteed 52.5? That, I wasn't aware of the change from the 52.5 to the 50. So if we could just maybe have an update, were we guaranteed 50% if we moved the high school to Curtis Corner?
So you're right. The way that I describe this is this, and I think that there's some virtue to the 35 that I'll get to in a second as well. State law has a minimum. The state RIDE has to make at least a 35% contribution for these projects if they're approved. For South Kingstown, and it's the lowest number anywhere in the state. It's a number of other municipalities. We're not alone in that 35% category. RIDE has made assurances to the superintendent that if we design the project as she's described it to RIDE, we are eligible for 50% reimbursement. However, RIDE will not guarantee and will not make a determination as to eligibility until after construction. And the reason that is they don't approve they don't guarantee it up front. They want to see it built. And they say, yeah, the solar panels are there, you get the solar panel credit.
So if we do what we say we're going to do, it basically is if you do what you say you're going to do.
That's correct.
They have which is.
They've given us that assurance.
They have given us the assurance that we are a 50% reimbursement.
That's correct.
Right? Okay.
Based on the uncertainty,
Still, nothing's
at this
guaranteed.
time, I
So I'm
believe
going
it
to come
makes
back
sense.
to the 35, and one of the reasons that doing a 35% reimbursement makes sense is for us to get a sense of how urgent it really is. You know, if we could tolerate 35 and we missed the window, maybe that relieves some tension as well. I mean, again, one of the things that I think is important for us to realize is we shouldn't be blown by the winds of opportunity that the state have sent our way. We really need to be the masters of our own destiny. We need to define a project and explain a project and all believe in a project and move forward on the project in a good way. And I think doing the 35% cost estimate calculation, or the 35% reimbursement estimation, is good because it lets us look at, you know, the apple, the 50%, and the orange, and decide, hey, how bad would it be if we had to eat oranges? So I think that makes sense. We'll do it.
So I just want to make a couple comments about the 3% maintenance. So we know that we have an operational budget that pushes the max every year without doing the 3%. So we're going forward, we're still going to have that challenge. I don't think we've done anything to solve that. I'm really uncomfortable with the fact that the program has not been defined, right? The project has not been fully defined to the point where we don't even have good money estimates yet. So that to me makes it uncertain enough that it would be hard for me to say we should be bonding anything until we have a defined program. And I don't know that that happens quickly enough for our decision. Maybe it does. And on bonding, so 20 to 30 year, listen, the reality is when you do a 20-year bond, you're levying a tax on potentially some people who aren't even born yet. You do it to a 30-year bond, and you're doing it to more of those people. So I think we really need to be aware of the fact that this is going to affect many, many people down the road. The extra cost of going to 30 years and putting that tax on somebody who is not even here yet, to me, is a stretch. So having said all that, I have a completely open mind, and I'd like to see what the final project is and see what the effects are to the educational product that we get. I'm in a wait and see. Thank you.
Any other comments up at the table at this point? All right. Well, this final agenda item of the other matters of interest and concern will be an opportunity for the public to come and speak if they would like. It's sort of open forum, but if you want to address what was said up here, that would probably be helpful. I'll try to keep people to 3 minutes.
Good evening, Donald Beasley. So let me see if I have this right. 85 million, 6.5 is municipal. Okay.
The school project that we've built the CIP around is an $85 million project. We have an additional $6.5 million municipal program that would be bonded separately. And the total amount bonded under that program is $78 million for the schools. So our total bonded debt at the end of those two projects, or at the end of the bonding after the issuance of those bonds for the school and for municipal programs, would be $90.2 million.
All right, but 78.5 for the schools. Or 85. Are we at 85 for the schools? 85 for the schools, right? But 78.5 bonded? So where are you getting the other 6.5 million for the schools?
No, the 6.5 is municipal bonds, proposed municipal bonds for Matunic seawall improvements to the facilities at Old Mountain Field, a boat launch and road improvements, as well as a public safety radio system.
All right, so it's 85 for the schools and 6.5 for the town, so it's a total of 92.5.
Is that right? Well, the 80 is actually 78 because there's this thing that we have to do with $6 million going, or yeah, not quite, $78 million. So it's 90.2. $78 million would be bonded for the school project. The total cost of the project would be $85 million.
For the schools?
That's correct.
Okay, but anyway, so here's what I'm getting back to. So the new number for the high school is $65 million, is that correct?
That's the number I've been operating with.
Okay, and now you're going to spend $15 million to put unnecessary additions onto Broad Rock. So that's $80 million, is that correct?
That would be correct. Again, the operating number for the high school has been 65. That's not the number that the schools have been working with. We're going to have to wait and see what the cost estimators come to us with.
Okay, but I just want to give people a little warning here. 65 and 15, if you do the thing to Broad Rock, that's $80 million. Basically, that leaves you with no money.
$5 million for the elementary.
$5 million for the elementary schools, which today, not including just for priorities 1, 2, and a little bit of 3, is like $15 to $20 million. So you're not even going to touch your elementary schools. You would have to wait at least 7 to 10 years into bonding of this first phase of all this money before you would be able to then get more money into the hopper to fix your elementary schools. I'm going to say it again. I'll say it till I'm blue in the face. Okay, I'm leaving. The money's $15 million to Broad Rock is not required. We should take Peacetail Elementary School, and that should be the new grades 5 and 6 school in this town, and fill our other 3 elementary schools up with the kids instead of having half-full schools like we do this year. And then you have the $15 million you're not spending on Broad Rock. You can fix your elementary schools. And they're not going to turn into 21st century schools. They're just going to be, you're just going to fix the things that need to be fixed.
Thank you. Further public comments? All right. I don't see any more public comments. Any final comments up here at the table? Thank you for giving me that flashback to my MPA program, Rob. I think we've been here a while. We'll be here tomorrow night. Hopefully we'll see you then. And until then, we are adjourned.